The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m. just like every other morning. Maria rolled over and hit the snooze button, then immediately felt guilty about those extra 9 minutes. Every minute mattered when you were a single mom trying to make ends meet in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. She could hear her 4-year-old daughter, Lucy, still sleeping peacefully in the next room. The little girl had stayed up late the night before, working on a drawing of horses that she planned to show everyone at daycare. Maria smiled at the memory, but the smile faded quickly as reality set in. Another day of whispered conversations and judgmental looks awaited her. Maria had lived in Pine Valley her entire life. It was the kind of place where families went back 3 generations, where everyone attended the same church, and where a woman having a baby without a husband was still considered scandalous. She had hoped things would get easier after Lucy turned 4, but if anything, the judgment seemed to get worse. At the diner where she worked, customers would sometimes ask about Lucy's father. When Maria would simply say he wasn't in the picture, she could see the assumptions forming in their eyes. Some thought she was being secretive. Others assumed she had made poor choices. A few of the older women in town would shake their heads and mutter about girls these days when they thought she couldn't hear. The truth was both simpler and more complicated than their assumptions. Maria had been 22 when she met David at a friend's wedding. He was charming, funny, and from the next town over. They dated for 8 months before Maria discovered she was pregnant. David's reaction wasn't anger or denial. It was pure panic. "I'm not ready for this," he had said, pacing around her tiny apartment. "I mean, we're barely adults ourselves. How can we raise a kid?" Maria had tried to reassure him that they could figure it out together. She had dreams of a little family, of Sunday mornings making pancakes and teaching their child to ride a bike. But David's fear only grew stronger as the weeks passed. When Lucy was 6 months old, he packed his bags and moved to California, claiming he needed to find himself. The child support checks came sporadically for the first year, then stopped altogether. Maria had heard through mutual friends that David had started over completely. New job, new girlfriend, new life that didn't include reminders of his responsibilities back in Texas. That was 4 years ago, and Maria had built a life for herself and Lucy without him. She worked at Mel's Diner 6 days a week, taking the early morning shift so she could pick Lucy up from daycare by 3 o'clock. In the evenings, after Lucy went to bed, Maria studied online courses to become a certified bookkeeper. It was slow going, but she was determined to give Lucy a better life. The hardest part wasn't the long hours or the tight budget. It was the loneliness and the constant feeling that she was being judged by everyone around her. At church, the other mothers would politely include her in conversations, but she noticed how they never invited her to their coffee dates or girls' nights out. When Lucy had birthday parties to attend, Maria often felt like the other parents were being friendly out of obligation, rather than genuine warmth. Dating seemed impossible. The few men who had shown interest over the years had a pattern of behavior that Maria had learned to recognize. They would be charming and attentive at first, asking her out for coffee or dinner. But the moment she mentioned Lucy, something would shift. Suddenly, they would remember previous commitments, or their schedules would become mysteriously busy. There was Michael from the hardware store who had flirted with her for weeks, bringing her free coffee when she came in to buy supplies for small repairs around her apartment. When she finally agreed to go out with him and mentioned needing to find a babysitter for Lucy, his enthusiasm cooled instantly. He took her to dinner once, spent the entire evening checking his phone, and never called again. Then there was Robert, a teacher at the elementary school who seemed different. He was kind, patient, and worked with children every day. Maria thought surely he would understand. They went on 3 dates, and Maria began to hope that maybe she had found someone who could see past her circumstances. But when Lucy got sick and Maria had to cancel their 4th date, Robert's true feelings came out. "Look, Maria, you're great, but I'm looking for something less complicated," he had said over the phone. "I want to be someone's first priority, not compete with a kid for attention." Each rejection felt like confirmation of what Maria's sister Ashley constantly told her. Ashley was 2 years older, married to her high school sweetheart, and had 3 children of her own. She meant well, but her advice always stung. "You have to be realistic, Maria," Ashley would say during their weekly phone calls. "Men want to build something from the ground up, not inherit someone else's problems. Maybe you should focus on being a good mom instead of chasing after men who are never going to commit to damaged goods." The phrase damaged goods hit Maria like a physical blow every time she heard it. Was that really how the world saw her? Was Lucy's existence really just a problem that needed to be solved or overlooked? Maria tried to tell herself that Ashley was wrong, that the right person would love both her and Lucy. But as months turned into years, and as every potential relationship ended the same way, Maria began to believe that maybe her sister was right. Maybe she was asking too much. Maybe single mothers in small towns were destined to stay single. The worst part was how Lucy had started to notice. Children were more perceptive than adults gave them credit for. Lucy would ask why her friends had daddies, but she didn't. She would notice when Maria came home from failed dates looking sad and disappointed. Once, Lucy had even asked if it was her fault that men didn't want to be around them. That question had broken Maria's heart into a million pieces. She had scooped Lucy up in her arms and assured her that she was the best thing that had ever happened, that any man would be lucky to know her. But privately, Maria wondered if Lucy was picking up on the town's attitude toward their little family. At work, Maria put on a brave face. She smiled at customers, refilled their coffee cups, and made small talk about the weather. But she could feel their eyes on her, especially when Lucy would sometimes come to the diner after daycare if Maria couldn't find anyone to watch her. Most customers were polite enough, but there were always a few who made their disapproval known in subtle ways. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, would purse her lips when Lucy would color at a corner table. Mr. Patterson, who owned the feed store, once made a comment about children running wild in restaurants these days, loud enough for Maria to hear. The other waitresses at the diner were kind but distant. They were all older women whose children were grown, and they seemed to view Maria's situation with a mixture of pity and disapproval. They never said anything directly, but Maria caught their meaningful looks when she had to leave early for parent-teacher conferences or when Lucy got sick. Even the church, which preached about love and acceptance, felt unwelcoming. Pastor Williams was kind enough, but some of the congregation members made Maria feel like she was wearing a scarlet letter. During services about family values and the importance of marriage, Maria would feel dozens of eyes glancing her way. The children's Sunday school teacher, Mrs. Cooper, had once pulled Maria aside to suggest that Lucy might benefit from having a positive male role model in her life. The conversation was couched in concern for Lucy's development, but Maria understood the underlying message. Her family was incomplete and inadequate. All of these experiences had built up over the years, creating a wall around Maria's heart. She had learned to expect rejection, to brace herself for disappointment. When people were kind to Lucy, Maria waited for the other shoe to drop. When men showed interest in her, she looked for signs that they would eventually leave. The worst part was that Maria had begun to see herself through their eyes. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had made poor choices, someone who was damaged and unworthy of real love. She had convinced herself that her worth was tied to her circumstances, that being a single mother made her somehow less than other women. Late at night, after Lucy was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Maria would sometimes cry, not just from loneliness but from the fear that Lucy would grow up thinking their family wasn't good enough. She worried that Lucy would internalize the judgment they faced, that she would believe she was somehow responsible for their social isolation. But in the morning, Maria would get up, make breakfast, get Lucy ready for daycare, and face another day with as much strength as she could muster. Because no matter what anyone else thought, Lucy was the most important thing in her world. And if being Lucy's mom meant being alone forever, then that was a price Maria was willing to pay. She just wished it didn't hurt so much to be strong all the time. She wished she could believe that somewhere out there, someone might see their little family not as damaged goods but as something beautiful and worth loving. But after years of disappointment and judgment, that hope felt impossible to hold on to. As Maria got ready for another day at the diner, she looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and practiced the smile she would wear for the next 8 hours. Behind that smile was a heart that had learned to expect the worst even while hoping for something better. It was a Tuesday morning in early March when everything started to change. Maria was wiping down tables before the breakfast rush when the bell above the diner door chimed. She looked up to see a man she didn't recognize, tall, wearing a worn cowboy hat and boots that had seen plenty of work. His jeans were clean but faded, and there was something gentle about the way he removed his hat when he entered. Morning, he said with a polite nod. Taking a seat at the counter, Maria grabbed a coffee pot and a menu. Good morning. Coffee to start? Yes, ma'am. Black, please. His voice was quiet and respectful. Maria poured his coffee and set the menu in front of him. I'm Maria. I don't think I've seen you around before. Name's Carlos Rodriguez, he said, tipping his head slightly. Just started working at the Henderson Ranch about a week ago. Heard this place makes the best breakfast in town. Maria smiled genuinely for the first time that morning. Well, I hope we live up to the reputation. What can I get you? Carlos studied the menu for a moment. How about scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and maybe some of those hash browns? Coming right up. As Maria called the order back to the kitchen, she found herself glancing at Carlos. There was something different about him. He didn't seem to be in a hurry like most of the ranch hands who came through. He sat quietly looking out the window at the main street, occasionally sipping his coffee. When she brought his food, Carlos thanked her politely and asked how long she'd been working at the diner. About 4 years now, Maria said, refilling his coffee cup. Started right after. She paused, not sure why she was about to share personal information with a stranger. Right after my daughter was born. She waited for the usual reaction, the slight shift in posture, the change in tone, the polite way men found excuses to end conversations when they learned she had a child. But Carlos just nodded. Must be nice having family here in town, he said simply, cutting into his eggs. Maria was so surprised by his response that she almost dropped the coffee pot. Yes, it is. When Carlos finished his breakfast, he left a generous tip and told Maria he'd probably see her again soon. After he left, Maria found herself thinking about the interaction. He hadn't asked about Lucy's father. He hadn't made assumptions about her situation. He had just treated her like any other person serving his breakfast. 2 days later, Carlos was back. Same time, same seat at the counter. This time, when Maria approached with the coffee pot, he was ready with his order. Let me guess, Maria said with a small smile. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, hash browns, and black coffee. You've got a good memory, Carlos said, returning her smile. As the weeks passed, Carlos became a regular fixture on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. He was always polite, always grateful, and never seemed to be in a rush. Maria began to look forward to those mornings, though she tried not to read too much into it. He was probably just being friendly. The real test came on a Thursday morning when Lucy's daycare had a scheduling mix-up. Maria had to bring Lucy to work with her for a couple of hours until she could arrange alternative childcare. She was nervous about having Lucy at the diner, knowing how some customers reacted to children in the restaurant. Lucy was being good, sitting quietly at a corner table with her coloring books and crayons, but Maria could see some of the other customers, glancing over with disapproving looks. Mrs. Patterson was whispering to her friend about workplace professionalism, loud enough for Maria to hear. When Carlos came in for his usual breakfast, Maria's stomach tightened with anxiety. This would be the moment when his friendly attitude would change. This was when she would see his true feelings about her situation. But as Carlos took his usual seat at the counter, Lucy looked up from her coloring and waved. Hi, mister. Carlos turned around and smiled. Well, hello there. That's some beautiful artwork you're working on. Lucy beamed and held up her drawing of a purple horse with pink wings. It's a magic horse. Her name is Sparkles. Instead of giving a polite but dismissive response like most adults did, Carlos got up from his seat and walked over to Lucy's table. He crouched down to her level, studying the drawing seriously. That's incredible, he said. I work with horses every day, but I've never seen one quite this magical. Does Sparkles have any special powers? Lucy's eyes lit up. She can fly anywhere in the world, and she can talk to other animals. And she's really good at making people happy when they're sad. Those are excellent powers for a horse to have, Carlos said solemnly. The world needs more horses like Sparkles. Maria watched this interaction with amazement. Carlos wasn't just being polite to a child. He was genuinely engaging with Lucy's imagination. He asked about other drawings Lucy had made, listened attentively to her explanations about her stuffed animals, and even shared that he had a horse at the ranch named Thunder, who might like to meet Sparkles someday. When Carlos finally returned to the counter for his breakfast, Lucy called out, Bye, Mr. Carlos. Come see my drawings again. I'd be honored to, Carlos replied, tipping his hat to her. As Maria served Carlos his eggs and toast, She felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. But she quickly pushed the feeling down. Men were often nice to children in public. It didn't mean anything beyond basic politeness. "She's a sweetheart," Carlos said, cutting into his eggs. "Thank you," Maria said carefully. "I'm sorry if she disturbed your breakfast." Carlos looked genuinely surprised. "Disturbed? Not at all. She brightened my whole morning. You're raising a special little girl there." Over the following weeks, whenever Lucy was at the diner, Carlos would make a point of asking about her latest drawings or hearing about her adventures at daycare. He never seemed annoyed or impatient, even when Lucy would chatter excitedly about her toys or the books someone had read to her. One morning, Carlos arrived with a small wrapped package. "I hope you don't mind," he said to Maria, "but I saw this at the store and thought Lucy might like it." Inside the package was a small plastic horse, not fancy or expensive, but clearly chosen with care. It was purple, just like the horses Lucy loved to draw. "You didn't have to do that," Maria said, touched by the gesture but also worried about accepting gifts. "I wanted to," Carlos said simply. "Every artist needs inspiration for their next masterpiece." When Lucy saw the horse, she hugged it tightly and declared that it was Sparkles' new friend. She named it Mr. Carlos's horse and carried it with her everywhere. That afternoon, as Maria was cleaning up after the lunch rush, she realized that Carlos had never asked about Lucy's father. He had never made assumptions about their family situation. He simply accepted them as they were, a mother and daughter who were complete on their own. The other waitresses at the diner had noticed Carlos's attention to Maria and Lucy. Betty, the oldest waitress, pulled Maria aside one afternoon. "That cowboy seems sweet on you," she said with a knowing smile. Maria felt her cheeks flush. "He's just being friendly." "Honey, I've been working in diners for 30 years. I know the difference between friendly and interested, and that man is definitely interested." Maria wanted to believe Betty, but her past experiences had taught her to be cautious. Men could be charming and kind when there was no real commitment involved. It was when things got serious that they usually ran. Still, she couldn't deny that Carlos was different from the other men she had encountered. He remembered details about Lucy's interests. He asked about Maria's bookkeeping studies and seemed genuinely impressed by her determination to build a better future. He never made her feel rushed or pressured. One Thursday morning, Carlos lingered after finishing his breakfast. The diner was quiet, with just a few customers scattered around the dining room. "Maria," he said, seeming slightly nervous for the first time since she'd known him, "I was wondering if you might like to go to the county fair this weekend. They're supposed to have some good music, and I heard there's a petting zoo that kids love." Maria's heart jumped, but her protective instincts kicked in immediately. "That's very kind of you, but—" "Lucy would be welcome, of course," Carlos said quickly. "I wouldn't expect you to get a babysitter. I was thinking it might be fun for all of us." The fact that Carlos had automatically included Lucy in his invitation surprised Maria. Most men who asked her out seemed to forget she had a child, or they expected her to arrange for Lucy to be elsewhere. "I don't know," Maria said hesitantly. "Lucy can be a handful at events like that." Carlos smiled. "I grew up in a family with 6 kids. Trust me, I can handle one well-behaved 4-year-old. Maria looked into Carlos's eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. No hidden agenda, no reluctance about spending time with her daughter. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to consider saying yes to a man who seemed to see her and Lucy as a package deal worth pursuing. "Okay," she said quietly. "We'd like that." Carlos's smile was so bright it could have powered the entire diner. "Really? That's wonderful. How about I pick you both up around 2 on Saturday?" As Carlos left the diner that morning, Maria felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel: excitement about the future. Maybe, just maybe, there was someone in the world who could see past the judgments and assumptions, someone who looked at her and Lucy and saw not damaged goods but a family worth getting to know. Saturday arrived faster than Maria expected. She changed her outfit 3 times, trying to find something that looked nice but was also practical, for chasing after Lucy at a county fair. She settled on jeans and a blue blouse that Lucy had once said made her eyes look pretty. Lucy was bouncing with excitement, wearing her favorite dress with horses printed on it, and clutching the purple plastic horse Carlos had given her. "When is Mr. Carlos coming? Is he really going to take us to see the animals?" "Yes, sweetheart. And remember, you need to stay close to us and use your best manners." When Carlos knocked on their apartment door at exactly 2 o'clock, Maria felt her heart skip. He was wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt, and he'd obviously made an effort to look nice. But what struck her most was how his face lit up when he saw Lucy. "There's my favorite artist," he said, crouching down to Lucy's level. "Are you ready for some fair adventures?" "Yes, can we see the horses? And the cows? And can I get cotton candy?" Carlos laughed. "I think we can arrange all of that." The drive to the fairgrounds was comfortable and easy. Carlos had brought a booster seat for Lucy, a thoughtful gesture that hadn't occurred to Maria to mention. Lucy chattered the entire way, telling Carlos about every animal she hoped to see and every ride she wanted to try. When they arrived at the fair, Maria was amazed by Carlos's patience. Lucy wanted to stop at every booth, pet every animal, and examine every colorful display. Instead of hurrying her along or getting frustrated, Carlos followed Lucy's lead, asking questions about what she was seeing and sharing stories about the animals on his ranch. At the petting zoo, Lucy was initially shy around the goats and sheep. Carlos knelt beside her, showing her how to hold her hand flat when feeding them treats, and staying close until she felt comfortable. When a particularly friendly goat tried to eat Lucy's hair, Carlos gently redirected the animal while Lucy giggled. "Mr. Carlos, do you think the animals like me?" Lucy asked as they watched a pig roll in the mud. "I think they love you," Carlos said seriously. "Animals are good judges of character, and they can tell when someone has a kind heart like yours." Maria watched these interactions with a growing warmth in her chest. Carlos wasn't just tolerating Lucy's presence. He was genuinely enjoying himself. He seemed to take as much pleasure in Lucy's excitement as she did. When Lucy decided she wanted to try the small Ferris wheel, Maria hesitated. "I don't know, honey. It might be too scary." "I'll ride with her if she wants," Carlos offered. "I used to take my little cousins on rides like this all the time." Lucy looked up at Carlos with complete trust. "Will you hold my hand if I get scared?" "Absolutely," Carlos promised. Maria watched from the ground as the Ferris wheel slowly turned, carrying Carlos and Lucy up into the air. She could hear Lucy's delighted squeals and see Carlos pointing out the view of the town spread below them. When they came down, Lucy was practically glowing with excitement. "Mama, I could see our whole house from up there. And Mr. Carlos said next time we could try the bigger one." The casual way Carlos had said "next time" made Maria's heart flutter. He was already thinking about future outings, future memories to make together. As the afternoon wore on, Maria found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. For once, she wasn't worried about Lucy bothering someone or being judged for her parenting. Carlos seemed to genuinely enjoy Lucy's company, and Lucy was clearly smitten with her new friend. When they stopped for dinner at one of the food trucks, Lucy announced that she was going to draw a picture of their day. "I'm going to put in all the animals and the big wheel, and you and me and Mama all together." "That sounds like it's going to be a masterpiece," Carlos said. "I'd be honored if you'd make me a copy." As the sun began to set, they made their way toward the main stage where a local band was setting up. Lucy had finally started to get tired, leaning against Maria's leg as they found a spot on the grass to listen to the music. "This has been perfect," Maria said quietly to Carlos as Lucy dozed against her shoulder. "It really has," Carlos agreed. "I can't remember the last time I had this much fun. Even with a 4-year-old along for the ride?" Carlos looked genuinely surprised by the question, especially with Lucy along. "She makes everything more interesting. You should see the world through her eyes. Everything is magical and exciting." As they walked back to Carlos's truck, Lucy fell asleep in Maria's arms. Carlos gently took the sleeping child and carried her to the truck, carefully buckling her into the booster seat. "Lucy didn't even wake up during the transfer. She really trusts you," Maria observed, watching her daughter sleep peacefully. "The feeling is mutual," Carlos said softly. The drive home was quiet, with only the soft sounds of Lucy's breathing from the back seat. When they reached Maria's apartment, Carlos carefully lifted Lucy from the truck and carried her upstairs, waiting patiently while Maria unlocked the door. "I can take her," Maria whispered, but Carlos shook his head. "Just show me where her room is." Carlos gently laid Lucy on her bed while Maria pulled off her shoes and covered her with a blanket. Lucy stirred slightly, mumbling something about purple horses before settling back into sleep. Outside in the hallway, Maria suddenly felt shy. The day had been so natural and easy, but now that it was ending, she wasn't sure what to say. "Thank you," she said finally. "For today, for everything." Lucy had the time of her life. "So did I," Carlos said. "Would it be okay if I called you sometime this week? Maybe we could do something again next weekend?" Maria nodded, not trusting her voice. As Carlos headed down the stairs, he turned back. "Maria, you're doing an amazing job with Lucy. She's lucky to have you as her mom." After Carlos left, Maria sat on her couch and replayed the entire day in her mind. For the first time in years, she had felt like part of a normal family. Carlos had treated Lucy like she was his own child, never once making Maria feel like her daughter was an inconvenience or a burden. But even as happiness filled her heart, doubt began to creep in. The day had been perfect, but what happened when the novelty wore off? What happened when Carlos realized that dating a single mother meant dealing with sick days, tantrums, and the countless small responsibilities that came with raising a child? The next morning, Lucy woke up chattering about their adventure. "When can we see Mr. Carlos again? Can he come for dinner? Can we show him my room and all my stuffed animals?" Maria made non-committal answers, not wanting to build up Lucy's expectations in case Carlos decided he wasn't interested in pursuing things further. But on Tuesday morning, Carlos was back at the diner with his usual breakfast order and a warm smile. "How's my favorite artist doing?" he asked when Maria brought his coffee. "She's been talking about the fair nonstop," Maria said. "I think you made quite an impression." "She made an impression on me too," Carlos said. "I keep thinking about how excited she got over those baby goats." Over the following weeks, Carlos became a more frequent presence in their lives. He would stop by the diner on his days off, always bringing something small for Lucy. A wildflower he'd picked on his way to town, a smooth stone he'd found by the creek, or a feather from one of the chickens at the ranch. Lucy began asking when Carlos was coming every morning, and she started including him in her drawings of their family. Maria noticed that the pictures now showed 3 figures instead of 2, with Carlos always drawn wearing his cowboy hat and standing next to them. One evening, when Lucy was particularly fussy about going to bed, Maria mentioned it to Carlos the next day at the diner. "4-year-olds can be challenging," she said, refilling his coffee cup. "Most kids that age are testing boundaries," Carlos said. "It's actually a good sign. Means they feel secure enough to push limits. You're giving her the stability she needs to grow." Maria was surprised by his insight. "Do you have experience with children?" "I'm the oldest of 6 kids," Carlos explained. "Plus I've got 12 nieces and nephews. I've seen just about every phase kids go through." The knowledge that Carlos had extensive experience with children should have been reassuring, but it also made Maria nervous. If he knew so much about kids, surely he understood exactly what he would be taking on if their relationship became serious. That fear was tested when Lucy came down with a stomach bug that kept her home from daycare for 3 days. Maria had to miss work, losing income she couldn't afford to lose. She was stressed, tired, and worried about Lucy's health when Carlos stopped by with homemade chicken soup. "My grandmother's recipe," he said, handing Maria the container. "Works better than any medicine." "You didn't have to do this," Maria said, touched by the gesture but also embarrassed that he was seeing her at her worst. Tired, worried, and dealing with a sick child. "I wanted to help," Carlos said simply. "Is there anything else you need?" "Groceries? Medicine from the pharmacy?" The offer was so genuine and thoughtful that Maria almost cried. When was the last time someone had offered to help her without expecting something in return? "We're okay," she said. "But thank you. How about I pick up some crackers and ginger ale? Sometimes that's all kids can keep down when they're sick." Before Maria could protest, Carlos was already heading back to his truck. He returned an hour later with not just crackers and ginger ale, but also coloring books, crayons, and a small stuffed animal. Spring melted into summer, and Carlos became woven into the fabric of Maria and Lucy's daily life. He would arrive at the diner early on weekends to help Maria set up tables and chairs before the breakfast rush. He fixed the squeaky hinge on Lucy's bedroom door and taught her how to whistle. On his days off, he would take them to the ranch where Lucy learned to brush the horses and collect eggs from the chickens. Maria found herself falling deeper in love with Carlos every day, but also growing more terrified. The higher her hopes climbed, the farther she would have to fall if everything came crashing down. She had been hurt before, and more importantly, she couldn't bear the thought of Lucy getting attached to someone who might eventually leave. But Carlos seemed different. He never showed impatience when Lucy had meltdowns over small things. He remembered to cut the crusts off her sandwiches and knew that she liked her apple slices in a special bowl. He had even learned the words to her favorite bedtime story and could recite it from memory when Maria was too tired after long shifts at the diner. The first real test came on a busy Saturday morning at the diner. Maria was juggling 6 tables when Lucy, who was coloring at her usual corner table, accidentally knocked over a full glass of orange juice. The sticky liquid spread across the floor just as Mrs. Peterson, the mayor's wife, was walking by carrying a tray of food from the breakfast buffet. Mrs. Peterson slipped on the juice, though she managed to catch herself before falling. Her tray clattered to the floor, sending scrambled eggs and bacon flying across the dining room. The entire restaurant went silent as every customer turned to stare. "I'm so sorry." Maria rushed over with towels, her face burning with embarrassment. "Lucy, honey, come help me clean this up." Lucy, who was only 4 and overwhelmed by the attention, started crying. "I didn't mean to. It was an accident." Mrs. Peterson was clearly furious, though she was trying to maintain her composure in public. "Perhaps children shouldn't be allowed in restaurants during busy hours," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some of us are trying to enjoy a peaceful meal." Maria felt the familiar weight of judgment settling over her. She could feel every customer's eyes on them, could sense their disapproval. This was exactly the kind of scene that reinforced everyone's opinion that single mothers couldn't control their children. That's when Carlos appeared. He had been having breakfast at the counter when the accident happened, and now he knelt down beside Lucy, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Hey there, Lucy," he said quietly. "Accidents happen to everyone. Do you want to help me and your mom clean this up?" Lucy nodded through her tears. Carlos handed her some paper towels and showed her how to soak up the juice while he worked on the bigger mess. Within minutes, they had the floor clean and dry. "Mrs. Peterson," Carlos said, standing up and addressing the mayor's wife directly, "I'm terribly sorry about your breakfast. Please let me buy you a replacement meal." Mrs. Peterson looked surprised by the offer, and some of her anger seemed to deflate. "That's not necessary," she said stiffly. "I insist," Carlos said politely but firmly. "And Lucy, would you like to help me carry Mrs. Peterson's new tray to her table? I bet if we're very careful, we can make sure nothing spills this time." Lucy wiped her eyes and nodded eagerly. She wanted to make things right. Carlos got a fresh tray of food from the kitchen and let Lucy help him carry it to Mrs. Peterson's table, praising her for being such a good helper. The entire interaction had taken less than 10 minutes, but it changed everything. Carlos had stepped in to support both Maria and Lucy without making a big scene or drawing more attention to the situation. He had turned a moment of humiliation into a teaching opportunity for Lucy about taking responsibility and making amends. Later that afternoon, after the lunch rush had ended, Maria finally had a chance to thank Carlos properly. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Clean up our mess, buy Mrs. Peterson's meal?" "Yes, I did," Carlos said simply. "You're my family now. When something happens to one of us, it happens to all of us." The word family hung in the air between them. Carlos had said it so naturally, as if it was obvious that he considered himself part of their little unit. Maria felt her heart swell with hope and terror in equal measure. As the weeks passed, Carlos continued to prove his commitment in small but meaningful ways. He came to Lucy's daycare graduation ceremony, cheering louder than any of the actual parents when Lucy received her certificate. He helped Maria study for her bookkeeping certification exam, watching Lucy while Maria took practice tests. The night before Maria's final exam, she was so nervous she could barely eat dinner. Carlos noticed her anxiety and offered to take Lucy for the evening so Maria could have quiet time to review her notes. "Are you sure?" Maria asked. "She can be handful at bedtime." "We'll be fine," Carlos assured her. "Lucy and I are going to build a fort in the living room and practice our horse sounds." When Maria returned from the library 2 hours later, she found Carlos and Lucy asleep on the couch. Lucy curled up against his chest with her stuffed horse tucked under her arm. Carlos had one protective arm around her, and they both looked completely peaceful. Maria stood in the doorway watching them, feeling like her heart might burst. This was what she had dreamed of during all those lonely nights. Someone who loved Lucy as much as she did. Someone who would protect and cherish her daughter. The exam went well and Maria passed with high marks. When the results came in, Carlos insisted on taking them out to celebrate. At dinner, he raised his glass of iced tea and a toast. To Maria, he said, who proves every day that determination and hard work can overcome any obstacle. Lucy clapped her hands excitedly. Yay, Mama. You're the smartest. But even as Maria basked in the warmth of their celebration, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. That same week, she received a phone call that changed everything. Maria, it's David. She almost didn't recognize the voice of Lucy's biological father. It had been 3 years since their last contact, and she had assumed he was gone from their lives for good. What do you want, David? I heard you're seeing someone new, he said without preamble. Some cowboy who's been playing daddy to my daughter. Maria's blood ran cold. How did you? Small towns, Maria, word gets around. I also heard you've got some fancy new job lined up. It was true. Maria had just accepted a position as a bookkeeper at the local credit union. A job that would provide steady income and health benefits for both her and Lucy. I've been thinking, David continued, and I've decided I want to be part of Lucy's life. I want joint custody. You want what? Maria's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. I'm her father, Maria. I have rights. And frankly, I don't like the idea of some stranger raising my kid. You haven't seen her in 3 years. You don't even pay child support. That's going to change, David said coldly. I've got a good job now, a stable living situation. My lawyer says I have an excellent case for getting shared custody, maybe even primary custody if I can prove you're not providing a stable environment. The threat was clear. David was going to use her relationship with Carlos against her, claim that she was bringing strange men around their daughter. In their conservative town, a judge might very well side with a father who suddenly wanted to be involved, especially if he could paint Maria as irresponsible. I'll call you next week to set up a meeting, David said. We need to work out a visitation schedule. The line went dead and Maria stood in her kitchen shaking with fear and rage. Just when everything in her life was finally coming together, just when she had found happiness and stability for herself and Lucy, David was going to try to destroy it all. That night, after Lucy was asleep, Maria called Carlos and asked him to come over. When he saw her face, his expression immediately grew concerned. What's wrong? Maria told him about David's call, about the threats of a custody battle, about her fear that she might lose Lucy. Carlos listened without interrupting, his jaw growing tighter with each detail. He can't just show up after 3 years and demand custody, Carlos said when she finished. He can try, Maria said miserably, and in this town, with his family's connections and money for lawyers, he might succeed. Especially if he can convince a judge that I'm being irresponsible by having you around Lucy. The words hung heavy between them. Maria saw something shift in Carlos's expression and her heart sank. This was it. This was the moment when reality would crash down and Carlos would realize that being with her meant dealing with complications he had never signed up for. Maria, Carlos said slowly, are you asking me to step back? To stay away until this is resolved? The question was gentle, but Maria could hear the hurt underneath it. She looked into his eyes and saw her own fears reflected back at her. What if the custody battle dragged on for months? What if David's presence made Carlos realize that loving her and Lucy wasn't worth the drama and complications? Maybe, she whispered, hating herself for the words. Maybe it would be better if you weren't around for a while, at least until I figure out how to handle David. Carlos was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but she could see the pain in his eyes. If that's what you think is best for Lucy, then I'll respect that decision. But Maria, I want you to know something. This doesn't change how I feel about you and Lucy. 2 weeks had passed since Maria had asked Carlos to stay away, and they felt like the longest 2 weeks of her life. Lucy kept asking about Mr. Carlos, wondering why he didn't come to the diner anymore and when they could visit the horses at the ranch again. Each question broke Maria's heart a little more. The meeting with David had been even worse than Maria had expected. He showed up at the diner on a Tuesday afternoon with a lawyer, demanding to see Lucy and threatening to file for emergency custody if Maria didn't agree to his terms. He wanted Lucy every other weekend and 2 weeks during the summer, claiming he had every right to be part of his daughter's life. You can't just disappear for 3 years and then waltz back in, Maria had said, trying to keep her voice steady while customers at nearby tables pretended not to listen. I made some mistakes, David admitted, though he didn't sound particularly sorry, but I'm ready to be a father now. And frankly, I don't think it's appropriate for you to have some random guy around my daughter. What kind of example does that set? The lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit, had handed Maria a stack of papers. "These are the custody documents," he said coolly. "You have 30 days to respond. I'd recommend getting your own attorney." Maria knew she couldn't afford a lawyer, not with her diner wages and the new bookkeeping job that was still weeks away from starting. David knew it too, which was why he was pushing so hard. After they left, Maria had locked herself in the diner's bathroom and cried. Everything she had worked for, everything she had built for Lucy, was being threatened by a man who had never shown any interest in being a father until he heard she might be happy. The annual Harvest Festival was scheduled for the weekend, and normally Maria would have been excited to take Lucy to see the crafts booths and hear the local musicians. But this year she could barely find the energy to get through each day, let alone celebrate. "Are we going to the festival, Mama?" Lucy asked on Friday evening as they walked home from daycare. "I don't know, sweetheart. Mama's very tired. But they have pony rides, and Mr. Carlos said he might be there with some of the horses from the ranch." Maria's heart clenched. When had Carlos told Lucy that? She had asked him to stay away, but clearly he had been thinking about the festival. Maybe he would be there, and seeing him would only make everything harder. "We'll see," Maria said non-committally. Saturday dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the festival. Lucy woke up early, bouncing with excitement and wearing her favorite dress with the horse pattern. "Please, can we go, Mama, please? Everyone from daycare will be there." Looking at her daughter's hopeful face, Maria couldn't bring herself to say no. Whatever happened with David's custody case, Lucy deserved to enjoy being a child. Maria couldn't let her own fears and sadness rob Lucy of simple pleasures. The town square was already bustling with activity when they arrived. Families were spread out on blankets. Children were running between the various booths, and the smell of barbecue and funnel cake filled the air. Maria tried to smile and act normal for Lucy's sake, but inside she felt hollow. Lucy spotted some of her friends from daycare and ran off to play, leaving Maria standing alone near the craft booths. She was examining a display of handmade jewelry when she heard someone call her name. "Maria, there you are." It was Betty from the diner, hurrying over with a concerned expression. "Honey, are you okay? You've seemed so down lately." "I'm fine," Maria said automatically, though she knew she didn't look fine. She had lost weight over the past 2 weeks and had dark circles under her eyes from sleepless nights. "This is about that cowboy, isn't it?" Betty said gently. "Whatever happened between you two, maybe you should talk to him. I've seen the way he looks at you and Lucy. That man is head over heels in love." Before Maria could respond, Betty's attention was drawn to something happening at the main stage. "Oh, looks like they're about to announce the raffle winners." Mayor Thompson was indeed walking toward the microphone, but before he could speak, someone else stepped onto the stage. Maria's heart stopped when she saw who it was. Carlos stood in the center of the stage, looking nervous but determined. He was wearing his best shirt and his good cowboy hat, and he was holding a microphone with slightly shaking hands. "Excuse me, everyone," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet festival grounds. "I know this isn't part of the planned program, but I hope you'll indulge me for a few minutes." Maria felt frozen in place as hundreds of people turned to look at the stage. What was Carlos doing? This was exactly the kind of public attention that could make David's custody case stronger. "Most of you know me as Carlos Rodriguez from the Henderson Ranch," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "I'm not much for public speaking, but sometimes a man needs to make sure the whole world knows where he stands." Lucy had appeared at Maria's side, clapping her hands with excitement. "It's Mr. Carlos. Mama, look, it's Mr. Carlos. I came to this town 6 months ago," Carlos said, scanning the crowd until his eyes found Maria's. "I was just looking for work and a quiet place to live. I wasn't looking for anything else. But sometimes life has different plans." Maria's cheeks burned as she realized that every person in the crowd was now looking between her and Carlos, putting together the pieces of his speech. "I found something at Mel's diner that I didn't even know I was missing," Carlos continued. "I found a woman who works harder than anyone I've ever met, who has raised the most amazing little girl mostly on her own. I found a family that welcomed me in and showed me what real love looks like." There were murmurs rippling through the crowd now. Maria could see Mrs. Peterson whispering to her friend, could feel the weight of everyone's stares. This was her worst nightmare, being the center of gossip and speculation. But Carlos wasn't finished. "I've heard the talk around town. I know some people think a single mother is somehow damaged goods, that a child without a father in the picture is a burden someone has to take on. Well, I'm here to tell you that those people are wrong. His voice carried clearly across the festival grounds, and Maria could see people nodding along with his words. Maria and Lucy aren't damaged goods. They're not a burden. They're the greatest gift I've ever received. They're my family, and I'm not ashamed to say it in front of everyone in this town. Then, to Maria's complete shock, Carlos got down on one knee right there on the stage. He pulled a small box from his pocket and held it up so everyone could see. But before I ask Maria the most important question of my life, he said, turning toward where Lucy was standing, I need to ask someone else first. Lucy's eyes went wide as Carlos spoke directly to her. Lucy, you're the sweetest, smartest, most creative little girl I've ever known. Would you give me permission to marry your mama? And would you let me be your daddy? Not to replace anyone, but just to love you and take care of you for the rest of my life. The entire festival had gone completely silent. Maria could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as everyone waited for Lucy's response. Lucy didn't hesitate for even a second. Yes, she shouted, jumping up and down. Yes, yes, yes. The crowd erupted in laughter and applause, but Carlos wasn't done. He stood up and looked directly at Maria, his eyes shining with tears. Maria, he said, his voice breaking slightly with emotion, you've shown me what it means to be strong, what it means to put someone else's needs before your own. You've raised an incredible daughter, and you've made me want to be a better man. I love you both more than I ever thought possible. Maria was crying now, tears streaming down her face as Carlos continued. I don't care what anyone else thinks about our family. I don't care about complications or challenges or people who want to judge us. All I care about is spending the rest of my life loving you and Lucy. Will you marry me? The crowd was completely silent again, waiting for Maria's answer. She looked around at all the faces staring at her, some curious, some supportive, some disapproving. She thought about David's threats, about the custody battle, about all the reasons she had convinced herself that this could never work. But then she looked at Carlos, standing on that stage with his heart completely exposed, declaring his love for her and Lucy in front of the entire town. She looked at Lucy, bouncing with excitement and hope, and she realized that some things were worth fighting for, worth taking risks for. Yes, she said, though her voice was too quiet for most people to hear. She said yes, Lucy shouted helpfully, and the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Carlos jumped down from the stage and ran to Maria, sweeping her up in his arms and spinning her around. When he set her down, he slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple but beautiful diamond that caught the afternoon sunlight. Lucy threw herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around their legs. We're going to be a real family, she announced to anyone who would listen. As people crowded around them with congratulations, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete acceptance. Not just from Carlos, but from her community. By making such a public declaration, Carlos had forced the town to see them as a legitimate family deserving of respect and celebration. Mrs. Peterson, who had been so critical of Lucy's behavior at the diner, was one of the first to approach them. Congratulations, dear, she said to Maria, seeming genuinely pleased.